Well, it's the 1st of July 2020. I, I made a video, a small video on reopening of schools, but till today, less than 100 people have watched it. And that's a very small number. And it is a bit astonishing because the reopening of schools involves lakhs and lakhs of children and thousands of teachers, as also thousands of schools. So I am wondering why nobody is interested in our children. Of course, there was a very nice comment by an educationist, and which was quite positive, and he seems very concerned, and justifiably so. The point is that children should not be at a loss, because in this chaotic time, we may tend to forget about children. We have our own problems, we have our jobs, we have our health, we have our businesses to think about, and somewhere children will slip. So therefore, I think I have to re-emphasize that we need to spare a thought for children. Actually, not spare a thought, but think about them again and again. And I will provide you some more facts and figures, because yesterday I came across another very nice article. This was a multicentric study from Europe. It involved 25 countries of Europe. It had about 600 children at a mean age of only 5 years who were COVID-19 positive. 25% of these 600 children spread across 25 countries. 25% of them had a pre-existing condition. 2/3 of them needed admission in hospital. 8% required an ICU admission, and only 4% required ventilation. The risk factors were boys, then children with a pre-existing lung condition or a respiratory disease or a pre-existing any condition, and a baby less than 1 month old. These were the risk factors in this particular study. The authors concluded, because the most important thing is that only 4 children died, which gives us a case fatality ratio of 0.67%. So therefore, the researchers concluded that although children are infected, the infection is mild, a few do need serious therapy, but fatality, death, is rare. That is the conclusion of the researchers, and I quite agree with them. And the mortality was 0.67%, despite the fact that only 3% were given antivirals like remdesivir. Only 1% of the children were given lopinavir, ritonavir. And surprisingly, 7% of these children were given hydroxychloroquine. But then this data is from the month of April. By then, hydroxychloroquine was still running very strong in the treatment of COVID-19. As far as the immunomodulators go, 1% received tocilizumab, and 3% received steroids, 1% received immunoglobulin. So one can see that the therapy, the treatment was not first class. But yet, we have a fatality of about 0.67%. So once again, I emphasize that children, though infected, will carry mild infection, and very few will succumb to COVID-19. Apart from this, this paper was published in the Lancet. And whatever I tell you, I provide links. So that is very important. for those of you who would like to research on what I'm saying, I am giving the references on YouTube. The other big study was on what is called a variant of Kawasaki disease. And I think one of the Indian newspapers carried a story 2 or 3 days back. Now, Kawasaki disease is seen in children less than 5 years old. It is possibly an autoimmune disease. The exact cause is unknown. It was first described in the 60s by a physician, a Japanese physician called Kawasaki, who incidentally died last month. And Dr. Kawasaki described these children as having a fever, rash, cracked lips, strawberry tongue, lymphadenopathy, and the development of aneurysms in their coronary arteries. That is the artery which supplies the heart. Now, we have seen recently, and there are reports coming in, that about till now, there are reports of 1,000 children who have what is called and what is being described as a multi-system syndrome. So these children have suffered possibly from COVID-19. After having COVID-19, about 2 to 4 weeks after COVID-19 infection, they develop this inflammatory multi-system syndrome. The British have called it PIMS, that is pediatric inflammatory multi-system syndrome. The Americans, I think, just call it multi-system inflammatory syndrome. And initially it was thought that this is probably Kawasaki, but now better sense has prevailed. People have realized, no, this is not exactly Kawasaki, because the children involved here are more than 5 years, and about more children here develop cardiac complications consisting of myocarditis and coronary aneurysms, and that is to the tune of 10 to 20%. But once again, mortality in this group is very low. It's just about 2 to 4%. And the disease itself, this inflammatory syndrome, is actually very rare. We have the figures. In 1,00,000 children, only 322 will develop or get infected by COVID-19. Out of 1,00,000 children, only 2, I repeat, only 2 out of 1,00,000 children will develop this inflammatory syndrome, which most probably is an immune reaction, once again a hyperimmune reaction as seen in adults. Sorry. And it comes after 2 to 4 weeks of the initial infection. So that's about the children. So again, I am elaborating on the fact that children do not get infected. If they do get infected, the infection is mild. Very few succumb to the disease. Now, this is all very reassuring, and what I've just told you is very recent, published in the Lancet and in the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, apart from children, we have to move on to the virus itself. This virus is a phenomenon. It's become a rock star. It's more than a rock star. It's a fearsome entity. People are terrified of this virus. The question is, where did the virus come from? That is very important. Where did this virus emerge from? We have been told, and this has been echoed and endorsed by the leading virology experts on the coronavirus. They have said again and again that this is a natural virus, this is a natural phenomenon. But I am very skeptical about that now, because I had anticipated that this virus would start getting dissipated, this virus would lose steam once the temperature goes up. For the simple reason that there is ample data that the SARS virus, which is the grandfather of this virus, there is data on the SARS virus showing that as temperature goes up, the virus disappears. Above 29 degrees centigrade, there was no presence of the SARS virus. So one had anticipated that as the temperature went up in India, there would be fewer cases. But that doesn't seem to be happening. We are getting more and more cases per day, which could be explained also by the fact that now we are testing, I believe, almost 2 lakh people every day. this is a combination of the PCR test and a rapid immune assays. But the fact remains that the virus is still going on. It just doesn't relent. It carries on. So what is this virus? Now that has raised suspicions in my mind. Maybe there is a possibility that the virus is not from nature. Maybe there is a possibility that the virus has been tinkered with. Maybe people have messed with it. And I will try to justify or buttress my hypothesis or what I'm trying to say. Now you must understand that across the world, there are what are called biosafety labs which experiment on bugs, which experiment on germs, on bacteria and viruses. Right? These labs are all over the world, especially they are in China. And there is this huge coincidence that Wuhan was the epicenter or the capital of the pandemic of COVID-19. But apart from that, Wuhan is the world center for research on the the bat coronaviruses. The maximum number of papers have emerged from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, WIV. And one of the leading researchers is a woman. Her name is Zhengli Shi. She's also called the Bat Woman. Now, a lot of papers were published by her, have been published by her in the last decade. All these papers are on experiments with the coronavirus, the bat coronavirus. And there has been collaboration with the American universities. So please understand that we have a virus which is presumed to be present in a bat. The presumption has been made that somehow the virus jumped from the bat to an animal, to an intermediate animal. It could have been a civet, it could have been a pangolin, it could have been a snake. And from that animal, it leaped onto a human being. And from then on, the epidemic spread. Now this was swallowed hook, line and sinker by just about everyone. And as I've said, we've had leading virologists who have, have repeatedly said that the virus is natural. And this stuff has been published in the leading, these quotations have been printed in the leading newspapers of the world. However, as I'm telling you that you have these biosafety labs which experiment on viruses, and we have levels on them. So one of the biggest labs in the world is in Wuhan. And this is, as I've just told you, is the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And this has a biosafety level of 4, which is the highest. That means they do the most dangerous experiments with viruses, right? And there is another laboratory in Wuhan, which is supposed to be just 200 meters from that infamous wet market, from where it is presumed this virus emerged, the SARS-CoV-2 virus emerged. That lab is called the Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and that has a biosafety level of 2. Now, it has been speculated that maybe there was an accident in one of these 2 labs. Maybe there was a virus, maybe this particular virus, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, was present in either of these 2 labs, and by sheer accident, it came out of the lab, either because a scientist or a worker got infected and took it home and spread it to the family members, and from there on to the locality. Now that is the presumption which has been made and which has been repeatedly told to you. But surprisingly, in fact in May, the #1 epidemiologist of China has publicly stated that there is no evidence that this virus emerged or originated from that wet market, the market where lots of meats are sold. Now this is an official declaration by the chief Chinese epidemiologist in May 2020. Now, either he's trying to say that also there has been a suggestion by the Chinese government that there was no accident in these labs. In either of the two labs, there has not been an accident. So therefore, there is no need for an investigation. And in fact, it has been told to us that any investigation suggested has been blocked by the Chinese government. So we are stuck. It seems that the Chinese government does not want an investigation, maybe because it thinks that no accident took place, or maybe no research was being done in these labs. Because if an accident took place, that means this virus was present in the lab. This virus was there, right? Because the other fact is that the bat viruses are not present in Wuhan. The bats carrying these coronaviruses in China are almost 1,500 kilometers away from Wuhan, in a place called Yunnan. So Yunnan is the well-known area which has these caves housing these bats, from which the bat woman would go with her associates and collect the bats, bring them to Wuhan, and there the experiments were done. Now the question is, what were these experiments? Now I'll start with the first kind of experiment. This is called passaging. So you must bear with me. The term is called passaging. What does passaging mean? I will try to simplify this so that even a layperson can understand. Passaging was done first, or in fact the first paper was published 8 years ago in 2012 in Nature by scientists from Amsterdam. So we had this Dutch scientist. His name was Fuchsia, I think Rod Fuchsia. Now Rod Fuchsia did this, what I believe, terrible experiment, horrible experiment, in which he took a virus. The virus he took was H5N1. I will come to that later. He took the H5N1, which was not a pathogen for an animal called ferret. Ferret is like a weasel. He introduced H5N1 in a ferret, the first ferret, right? Now, when a virus enters any creature, the virus mutates to a small extent. From the first ferret, these fellows, these scientists, the Dutch guys, took the virus and introduced it to the second ferret. From the second, they took it to the third ferret, from the third to the fourth ferret, and from the fourth to the fifth. So now you get the hang of it. The scientists were transferring the virus from one to second to second to third to fourth. And they went on doing this till they hit the 10th ferret, right? Till they got the 10th animal infected. They would infect the first animal, that would develop infection. They would take off the virus from the first animal and inoculate the second animal. Now, by the time the virus hit the 10th ferret, lo and behold, the virus now had mutated to such an extent that it could now jump to another ferret without any physical inoculation, which means now it had become airborne. It could travel in air. So therefore, a ferret away from the 10th ferret got infected. Now this was a huge thing. This was a huge experiment, and it also troubled a lot of scientists, because they now realized that by this technique called passaging, we could convert a virus into becoming more capable, having greater capacity to infect another person, not directly, not by physical contact, but by mere air transmission. Right? Now, what was the virus which these guys were using? This is called H5N1, which also has the name of avian flu virus. This virus is present in birds, especially in chicken. It infects chicken, it kills chicken, but it does not infect a human being until and unless the human being is in close contact, physical contact with the chicken. So therefore, we have reports in the world of avian flu infecting the virus H5N1 infecting human beings also. Now the bad thing is that once the human is infected, the mortality is not 0.5% as seen in COVID-19, or 10% as was seen in SARS, or 30% as was seen in MERS, but mortality with H5N1 is to the tune of 50 to 60%. Now this research was published, I will give you the link. This was hailed by a lot of scientists and also, of course, criticized by the sensible scientists. Because now you realize that man has converted a virus which could only be transmitted by close physical contact into a missile which can hit another creature without any physical contact. And this particular virus is lethal for man. Now the next step would be to convert this virus into a human pathogen, which means that not only by physical contact, close contact to a bird, we could be infecting one another by simply droplets, as has been happening in COVID-19. So you realize the ramifications. Now this was in 2012, and therefore the Americans, they were obviously also doing all these experiments. They stopped funding their labs from 2014 to 2017. For 3 years, they suspended these experiments, which were called passaging. They realized the enormity, or rather the ramifications of such enhancement of the ability of a virus to infect another creature. But of course, after 2017, the Americans realized that this won't do, and they resumed these experiments. So now we come to the interesting part. During this time, the Chinese were experimenting with the beta coronaviruses. What they were doing was, apart from passaging, they were also doing what is called gain of function. So you must remember this phrase, GOF, gain of function. What it simply means is that by engineering techniques, which are not very difficult, you can take a virus from an animal, cut a bit of it, and paste it on a virus of another animal. So this is also called recombination or recombinant DNA technique. So gain of function means that you take a part of a virus, the gene of a virus, and attach it or join it with a bit of a gene of another virus of another animal, right? So now you're actually playing God. You're actually manipulating the virus, right? You're creating what is called a chimera. You're creating a hybrid, in other words. Now this was being done by the Chinese, and guess who were they collaborating with? They were collaborating with the Americans. Now, one of the most interesting papers, I think, was published in 2014. Now these papers are published usually in scientific journals, big ones, called either Nature or Science, and this one was published in Nature, I think. The lead author, the Chinese were, of course, we have this woman, Zheng Li, and the American was a person called Ralph Barrick, from the University of Carolina. So we have Ralph Barrick and this woman as co-authors, as the principal authors of this paper, which was published in Nature. We showed that they had, by the technique of gain of function, created a virus, a new virus, a chimera virus. Now what did they do exactly? In this research, what they did was, they took the spike of a regular coronavirus, or let's say the SARS virus. Now remember, for the coronavirus to infect you, it needs the spikes. The spikes are the most important part of the virus to penetrate human cells, to enter the human cells. And the reception committee in the human body is a molecule called ACE2. So these two things are important. ACE2 is the receiving, stage, and the spike of SARS-CoV-2 is the component which allows it to enter the human body. So what the Chinese and the Americans were doing was, or what they did actually, they took the spike of a SARS virus, that bit, and patched it up with a SARS virus of a mouse, right? This they call the backbone virus. So you had a bit of a bat virus and a bit of a mouse, both of course were coronaviruses, and this they then ensured could penetrate ACE2 molecules or receptors in cultures. So this was, of course, an amazing study. Here we have, there was proof we could do it. Man could now assemble, pick up bits and pieces of two different viruses, combine them, and make the new virus, the chimera, capable of infecting a human cell. And the mouse virus had earlier been prepared by the Americans, by the University of Carolina. And that particular virus had been made more toxic by the passaging technique, which I've already described. So now we have a human mouse and a bat virus, which is ready to infect human cells and to infect mice. So now the problem is that we have, it's all there, it's transparent, that we have this, terrific coordination, cooperation, or whatever, by the Americans and by the Chinese to create viruses which can play havoc with humanity. And after this, again, there were a couple of papers, in fact, more than 2 or 3 papers published by the Chinese, by this lady, Zhang Lishi, which again showed that they were quite capable of not only passaging, but also the cut and paste technique of creating a chimera virus. Now this is all transparent. And apart from this guy, apart from the scientist called Ralph Baric, there's another organization headed by a guy called Peter Daszak. Now, Peter Daszak is the president of a NGO called Eco Health Association, or Alliance, sorry. It's called the Eco Health Alliance. You can Google it. The president is Peter Daszak. And he has also been a co-author with Zhang Lishi, the Chinese Batwoman, and has co-authored papers in which they've done this work of creating new viruses from the old bat coronaviruses, right? The important thing is now that the Eco Health Alliance has been funded and has partners. These partners are the CDC, the National Institute of Health, and possibly the Gates Foundation also, apart from the WHO. It is also well known, and in fact, this was published by Newsweek, of all the newspapers. Newsweek published these 2 stories, which clearly showed that the biosafety lab in Wuhan, the Wuhan Institute of Virology laboratory, had been working on these 2 techniques for the last few years. And most importantly, this particular lab was funded by the Americans, right? The NIH and other American agencies have given this particular lab $7.3 or $7.4 million, which means that's $74 lakh, which means about 4,000 crores or 5,000 crore rupees, has been provided by the Americans to the Chinese, to this particular laboratory, right, which has been experimenting on these viruses using these 2 techniques. And under the pretext is that, by experimenting on these viruses, we will have a better vaccine, and we will have better treatment. Now, of course, that has failed because neither do we have a vaccine, nor do we have a foolproof treatment for this disease. But that was a pretext. That was what was being told to the public. And that may be the reason why most mainstream media in the West is not actually covering this very, very, very rigorously. There is little diligence by the media. And of course, our chaps have no clue about these matters. From here we come to the fact that whether this virus came out by accident from these two labs in Wuhan, or, God forbid, there was a deliberate leak. Now, the American intelligence agencies have been saying, yes, maybe this is not a natural virus, this is an accidental virus, and most probably this was a leak. But of course, what else can they say? Because the Americans themselves were financing this lab. And not only this lab, I'm sure they were financing other labs in different countries in the world to do the same experiments, to make the virus more lethal. These are the experiments which have been done for the last so many years, right? And it is well known, a lot of papers have been published, that this particular virus, why is it so infective? Why is it catching so many people? The reason is simple, that despite the fact it is incapable of killing people, it infects people, right? The infectivity comes from the fact that the spike portion of this virus has been amplified, or rather enhanced, almost 10 times more than its grandfather, the SARS virus. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a virus which has very, very ferocious spikes, very efficient spikes that can attach to our receptors, to our ACE2 receptors, and that is the reason why the infection carries on and on and on. And that is the reason why temperature just doesn't work against this virus. Of course, they are saying that the ultraviolet rays from the sun destroys this virus in seconds. So therefore, if you stay outdoors, then your chances of getting infected is very low in daytime. In the night, because there is ultraviolet, so therefore, you can get infected in the night if you stay outside. But this again has also been indicated by the fact, and this is what is being reported, that after so many thousands and thousands of Americans were protesting, and they were all huddled together, walking barely 6 inches apart from one another, there has been no spike in these areas. Now, that is very surprising. But the explanation given is that possibly this was in daytime, so therefore the virus activity was lessened by the ultraviolet rays of the sun. But I'm diverting to the main issue. The main issues today were that for all its infamy, for all its problems, this virus is incapable of hurting our children. That is very important. Okay. The second big point which I'm making is that I have very serious doubts that this is a natural virus. The more you examine, the more you research, the more you are likely to accept the fact that this is an engineered virus. And the experiments are being done, the papers are being published these past years. The work was going on overtly. This was not concealed, this was not hidden. This was not classified. And if the Chinese were not worried about the work that was done in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, then why is it objecting to an investigation? Why does it block an investigation? And the other point is, why is not the West, particularly the Americans, not vocal about this investigation? Of course, there are distractions in the US right now. They are having a lot of problems. But Surprisingly, there is little effort being made by the American Foreign Ministry. They call it the State Department. And even my American journalists to pressurize, to put pressure, adequate pressure on the Chinese government for an expose, for an investigation into what was happening in the lab. You see, if there is evidence, if one finds evidence which could easily be found that the laboratory did possess these chimera viruses, these transformed viruses, these viruses which were far more toxic than the original grandfather SARS virus, then it becomes a debatable point whether there was a leak or whether something else went on. But then, of course, the most important thing is that the fact that the Chinese themselves suffered from this virus indicates that the government of China was not complicit in the leakage. There may be some other possibilities, or rather probabilities, about the leakage of this virus. So I will end this talk today by emphasizing the fact that this virus is not natural. I am not a virologist, I am a cardiologist, but whatever little research I have done, I actually have done a lot of research. And from that, it is clear to me that this virus has been engineered, it has been created artificially. But whether this virus was leaked from these labs by accident will be very difficult to confirm, for the simple reason that money was being given, grants were being given to the scientists, to the laboratory, by the Americans themselves. So therefore, we have a problem. We have a very tricky situation. The people who are funding this experiment are unlikely to pursue this matter to its logical conclusion. Thank you very much.